Hello, Trouties, and welcome to this week's episode of Facebook Live Friday, which I actually now am sharing these like on the website. So if you're not on Facebook, pardon the confusion, but my name is Sierra Bailey, and I am the owner, designer, and everythinger here at Manic Trout. And on Friday, I go live on Facebook. So that is why these are called Facebook Live Fridays. And every week at 1 p.m. Central, you will find me here. Of course, because Facebook's pretty cool like that, they stay up. So even if we are not live right now, I always reply to all comments and love to hear your thoughts, have a little conversation with you there in the comments, and to be able to get feedback from you. So please don't feel that if you don't make it live that you cannot be a part of the conversation. So today, I share kind of a variety of things on these live videos, some behind the scenes peeks, stories about the brand, style and fashion talk. But today I thought, after last week's talk about inspiration, that it would be kind of cool to share with you why I went into jewelry design. So many of you know I have a fine arts background. I have a BFA, and I went to school with a major in 3D animation, which kind of is still called computer graphics, was back then. So like the kind of thing like what Pixar was doing when I went to school back in the day. And I had a minor in painting. I started before that actually in architecture school. And throughout my childhood, I always wanted to be something in design. It ranged. I wanted to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to do really anything that came with design. I, of course, as a kid had a lot of, more fantasy ideas of what each of these careers meant. And even before I went to college, I had some fantasies of what each of these careers meant and had to learn a little bit. So I did not set out to be a jewelry designer. That was really not something that like my whole life, that's what I wanted to do. I, of course, made friendship bracelets as a kid. And man, by the end of making friendship bracelets, I was making the ones that were like this thick and had like, 4 different entrances. And I was making crazy ones, but that did not exactly make me think that I should be a jewelry designer. And I didn't know that much about jewelry design. When I was in college, I actually had a roommate who was in metalsmithing, and that was the only jewelry design that they taught in school. And I've spoken about it before, as I love color. And I started making my own jewelry when I was in high school because at the time it was it was when the Elsa Peretti era of Tiffany's kind of was going on, and when the Cartier Love Lock bracelet was going on. So it was like very minimal, sterling silver, not any color, very plain and simple jewelry was in massive trend. So therefore, like obviously that trickled down to other brands, and that's what was going on. And it made me want color. I craved color. So I was buying vintage jewelry and taking apart things and putting them back together. And when like with friends traveling places, I'd pick up beads at bead shops and making really colorful big things, which I continued on with obviously here at Manic Trout. But I also, like I said, when I saw the metalsmithing going on, that was not where I wanted to go with jewelry. And I have worked very hard to kind of discover the other ways. Like I, for a while, was making jewelry out of antique scarves that I was cutting apart and sewing together. So I was more into like the alternative methods than I was the traditional route. So I did not study jewelry in college. And when I graduated, I had made jewelry quite the hobby and continued to do that. But I was actually going more towards like the web design, digital imaging, things like that, which back then was pretty new. And I, as I said, still made jewelry as a hobby. And I had a lot of people that kept asking for what I was wearing. And so, as somebody, I was working for an artist at the time, and I was just starting Manic Trout, which I did as websites. And it was very interesting working for an artist. And I actually worked in a gallery as well because of my painting minor. I was really interested in that, but I was always a little skeptical if I wanted to be a painter. I really never wanted to be a painter for a living, but I loved it. I sadly do not paint often anymore, and I miss it, and I should get back to it. But what people did want, I for a very short time did sell some paintings. But while I was selling paintings, everybody was asking about the jewelry that I was wearing. So I started making, more and more, and then, pitching to stores. And it's interesting because as somebody that creates, there's like a fine line. I talked last week a lot about the muse and how important it is to get up every day and to treat creativity as a job. If it is your job, you get up and you are, the more you move and work that muscle, the more it's going to respond and be there. So if you are continuously being creative in your life, it doesn't run out. Maya Angelou had a wonderful quote about that I can't remember it exactly, but it is something about creativity is not something that runs out. The more you do it, the more that is actually there. So it wasn't necessarily like I want to go in and pursue a path in an area that I love necessarily creating, and I want to do this every day of my life because I loved creating in so many different ways. So I knew as long as I was creative, which sometimes so many of us that start businesses, it hurts us because we don't really understand the business side and we get in over our heads. And I still, to this day, 15 years later, I'm horrible at selling. I'm not very good at it. And I don't know anybody that really wants to balance their spreadsheets every month, but I don't like doing any of those type of things. And they're a struggle for me, like most creatives. And we have to kind of learn that. So as long as I knew I was in a creative field, which sadly, once you have a business and in a creative field for a long time, you do find out that the creativity is not a big part of it. And that's one of the reasons I've been enjoying doing these little mini collections, like the July one is out right now, so that I can design more often. Because with only having quarterly collections, you're not designing. I'm making all the time because I do all the production here. So I am constantly making, more and more of each of the pieces, but I'm only actually doing the designing part for smaller parts of the year. With the way I'm kind of moving into a little bit, it's like spreading it out a little bit more and I love it. Jewelry was kind of, to me, something that I could be creative with and something that I felt that I couldn't burn out on. Because that's a lot of it too. A lot of creatives, you're like, yes, I love to do this thing. And then after you do it for a while, you're kind of like, okay, I feel like I've, gotten where I'd like to be, that I really know this craft and I'm ready to move on now. So that's kind of an interesting thing that sometimes happens. Many of creatives, we go through, even people that just do them as hobbies and opt to not have it as a whole career, you get really into something and then you want to move on. So I was very nervous about getting into, if I went in one direction, like painting. I didn't always feel like that. I almost feel like I go against what I say, that I wouldn't be able to always like pull it together and be really creative with painting. Sometimes if I wasn't feeling it, I wasn't able to paint. So I was not comfortable going into that as a career because if I forced it with painting, it made a big mess sometimes. And I just probably hadn't flexed that muscle as much. But with jewelry, I could force it. I could make myself work through the problem, and it was more of like problem solving. So just the way my brain works, enjoyed that a little bit better. So the other reason, and this is kind of the second part of what I brought up, is the reason that I love jewelry is because of how special I think jewelry is. And here is why. I have never been somebody that likes to shop. I buy clothes a couple of times a year. Usually I have to be forced by like somebody to go shopping because it's not something that I'm into. I am small, but I'm not a petite. I am like curvy, but not really curvy. I'm really high-waisted. This is really short, but again, I have long arms, so I'm not a petite. So there are like very few things that actually fit me correctly. Very young, I got into the mindset that I still live by, and that is buy few things well made and let them last forever. I mean, I have clothes that I've had forever. You're going to start to see, for example, my dresses start cycling through because there's only so many that I have. But again, I realized this young, and that's why I was making jewelry in high school and college, that I realized that if you change up your accessories and kind of switch things around a lot, it gives your clothing like a breath of fresh air and kind of makes everything feel new. So I, very young, understood the power of a good accessory and the power of not just like, I'm going to wear the same necklace every day, because I feel like those people need maybe change their clothes up more. But if you're wearing for example, if you have a work wardrobe, which a lot of women are really into, if you are changing up your accessories all the time, it makes it so those combinations become larger, and that's just math. If you have 3 shirts, 4 skirts, 6 jackets, but 20 necklaces, the combinations get much, much larger that you can put together. So I was so drawn that jewelry had that power and that jewelry had that ability to change something. You could take a shirt and put 6 different styles of jewelry with it, and it would have a completely different look depending on what that jewelry was. So there's such power kind of in the beauty and like the magic of jewelry, of how it can transform things. And I loved that. I was very drawn to it. I was also really drawn to the gemstones themselves, and you know, I use a lot of the animals and things like that, and I was very drawn to why people wanted to wear certain animals, or why people wanted to wear certain, you know, things like that, or, you know, the metaphysical properties of the gemstones and what they mean, like how rose quartz is the love stone, and if you carry that in your pocket, you know, it will bring you love, or like the lore behind stones and the stories behind certain things. Like, I love the history of insect jewelry, and I think that is fascinating. So it was like this, there are so many stories that kind of tie in with jewelry, more than what a lot of, I mean, there is of course a huge history of fashion. And when you study fashion, you of course study, you know, everything from royalty down to peasants, and, you know, through the ages and what it symbolized and all that. But nobody wears those clothes anymore. Those are antiquated clothes that you only see in museums. Where, you know, beetle jewelry, which had such a play like in the Egyptian jewelry, still people are wearing beetle jewelry, and that to me is fascinating. So I really liked how it was such like a historical medium that was wrapped into modern times as well, and kind of brought that story. So that is kind of why I found jewelry so special, and was a draw aside from just the creative aspect. So when as I said, I started out, let's say, with the webpage thing and you know, like that, and I did a few other things. So then I started getting more and more into the business side, and I've talked about this in an earlier video, but that was when I started to understand, like, all right, you can't do everything. You have to kind of focus in. So for years I did jewelry and paintings. And for a lot of you, when you first found Manic Trout, I know those of you that saw my earrings in Real Simple like many years ago, that was a big draw of where a lot of the Trouties came to find Manic Trout. I still had paintings on the website, I think, back then. And it was soon after that it was, I started to get enough traffic and enough things like that I had to focus more on jewelry and more on things like that. And that's when the paintings went away. And by that time, I realized that there was so much still about jewelry that I was learning, and there was still so much that I felt I had in me creative-wise, and I really wasn't painting anymore at that time either. So I am glad that I made the right choice, because I've been now making jewelry for 25 years, professionally for 15, and I still have a lot of ideas. I'm working on 2 new collections right now that I'm excited about. But that is kind of what the start and draw for me for jewelry making was, and I thought that would be an interesting thing to share with you Trouties today. I like to mix up kind of the style and fashion posts with more of the stories about the brand, because I know that's interesting to everybody. And I don't actually think I've ever talked and explained like what the draw of mine going into jewelry design was out of all of the creative fields I was in. So it was interesting for me to share and to kind of think about that as well. I appreciate you guys, as always, being here, if you've watched live or even when you're watching later, and I thank you. Please, like I said, leave comments. Let's continue the conversation. If you are not friends or following, whatever they call it nowadays, Manic Trout on the Facebook page, just click on that. It's an image that looks pretty much like this right here of me, and you can follow along to make sure that you catch these. If you have to, you might have to go like look for it on Fridays, but every Friday at 1 p.m. Central, I go live on Facebook. And I am also Manic Trout on Instagram, Twitter, and all of the jewelry is available at manictrout.com. Again, I am Sierra Bailey. This is Manic Trout, and I hope to see you live next Friday.